With everything going on in the world, people need to be uplifted. They need something that promotes character, creativity, confidence, and joy. The GRN show is not just an average talk show. The topics are powerful and will make you think. Join me on this journey to be informed, to relate, to connect, and to evolve.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Gatel Louise Nicholas, and I'm your host for the GRN Show. We all know one. By that, I mean we all know someone who has been a victim of domestic violence. Many may think this is an issue that only affects women or people who live in a specific area, perhaps the underserved community. The fact is, 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men have experienced physical or sexual violence. According to national statistics, an average of 10 million women and men are physically abused by either their intimate partners or others that they live with. So anyone can be a victim of domestic violence, regardless of age, race, sexual orientation, faith, or class. So with us this evening, we have two amazing guests, and they're really going to help us dissect the who, what, when, and why domestic violence occurs. My first guest is Charlene Bowie. She is the founder of Coffee Break with Charlie, an organization dedicated to helping individuals who've been victims of domestic violence. Charlene, good evening. How are you today?
Good evening. I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
So good to have you with us. Thank you. And also with us, we have Tatiana Minding. Through her journey of being abused, she has discovered herself and is soaring. She is the president of Mighty Cleaning Services and very talented young woman. So I am so pleased to have you with us, Tatiana. Welcome.
Hi, Gatel. Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. This is such an important topic. And, the more you learn about it, I was quite surprised to hear that during the pandemic, the numbers really kept going up. So I'm hoping with the conversation that we have this evening, maybe we can reach a few people and really make an impact. So I'm going to start with you, Charlene. Briefly tell us about Coffee Break with Charlie and why was it founded?
Well, first of all, I am a domestic violence survivor myself, but I didn't start out this way to formulate a organization. It started out with just preparing my children and I for leaving my abuser, and making sure that they would be okay. And as time went on, people would come to my house and we would have these long discussions. And from the discussion, it became a book club. From the book club, what a friend of mine said, well, you should do a conference. I did a conference. And from that conference, it spiraled into where I'm at today. I've been hosting events since 2001 is when I originally started Coffee Break with Charlie. But as I stated, it started out with just women and young people coming to my home. What they back in the day in the 70s, we used to call it rap session. So it
Right.
started out with people just come and have discussions, but the prerequisite was that whatever went on, whatever was stated had to be confidential. And at any point in time that if I heard anything that was discussed in my home, you were not allowed to return, not even as a friend, because some of the things that people discussed were very private. because I dealt with a lot of leaders' children. And at some point, kids have to have a place of an outlet, a safe place to be able to share what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And so based on that, that was how Coffee Break with Charlie got started. But before it became Coffee Break with Charlie, it was Healing Hearts Outreach Ministry, because it was a Christian organization at first. And in order to reach all barriers and cross over beyond the church is when I started with the name Coffee Break with Charlie.
I love it because it also suggests very informal, laid back, and also, you have coffee with people you're safe with.
Yes.
I do appreciate what you're saying about confidentiality, because also that could be pretty dangerous for the victims if things get out, So that's wonderful. Now, Tatiana, you too, you have been a victim of domestic violence. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Okay, so these are the steps that I took in my journey of overcoming domestic violence, which I would refer to as the triple R's. First, I recognized what was happening. I stopped telling myself that, this is not happening. I basically recognized the issue.
And who was the abuser? Tell us a little bit about the abuser, and perhaps before you realized what was going on, tell us.
So, yeah, the abuser, this was somebody that I was in a relationship with. It was somebody that I trusted, that, I basically was supposed to feel comfortable and safe with them. So it didn't start out as abuse. It didn't start out as domestic violence, but as time progressed, I had to realize the signs and, stop being in denial about it. So that's basically how I was able to recognize what was going on. So not all the time it's, a stranger. This was somebody that I was with for a few years. So you want to watch who's, close to you. Secondly, I reached out to my resources and my support team. Not everybody is fortunate enough to have a support team, but definitely reach out to your community resources, and they may be able to go ahead and help you with shelter, counseling, or even employment, things like that. And lastly, I started my recovery process with just finding myself and finding what I was into, what I loved, and where I saw myself in the next 5 years. And that's where I began my recovery process.
Wonderful. So you really capsulize your whole process. And Charlene, I want to go back to the thought that we started out with. It's not just women. Men also go through the process. Can you share your thoughts on that? And in your with your experience with Coffee Break with Charlie, tell us, how do they handle the situation differently? Is there a difference?
There is. Men experience less abuse than what women do in many cases. A lot of times, first of all, men are not sharing that they are being abused. It's more private because it's humiliating for a man to actually admit the fact that a woman is abusive to him physically. But what men are experiencing a lot is the emotional abuse. There is no validation. There is negative words. And after hearing so many negative words, it does have an effect on you. But when it comes to the violence of men and women, women are experiencing more violence than what the men are. And the men are more private about what they are experiencing, rather it's via a spouse or a partner.
And go ahead, Tatiana.
Just to add on to that, Charlene, I'm glad you brought up the point that men are abused as well, and they just don't speak up because they're not physically abused. Verbal abuse is something, emotional abuse is something as well. And I think men, because it's not physical, they feel like it's not domestic violence, when in all actuality, any form of abuse is domestic violence.
It was interesting. And I go back to maybe, our parents' age, there was a time women did not work. And part of that abuse, from what I understand, can also be financial abuse. if you refrain. So, which brings me to my next question, Charlene. Is domestic violence based on some type of cultural or patriarchal type of culture? And
No,
what do you see in the community? People say,
patriarch.
well, it's only the poor. If they don't have money, they're under a lot of pressure. We're trying to really dissect this topic, as I mentioned. Give me your thoughts on that, Charlene.
Patriarchal abuse does not play a role in does not cause domestic violence. It plays a role in domestic violence in some cultures based on the man being the head of the house, being the breadwinner. The women are a little more subservient to that man, but it's not the cause of domestic violence. Many times, women who are experiencing domestic violence, it's a lot of times it's coming from that foundation of what that man has experienced in his childhood, where he has seen abuse within his own family. And a lot of times, when we look at what's happening in families nowadays, it's a tremendous amount of control, verbal abuse, and a lot of times women don't understand what the abuse looks like. And I said, when you understand the signs of abuse, it helps better to prepare you for what is to come, because most times it does not start physically. It starts with embarrassing you in front of your friends. It's talking down to you, making you feel less than. And a lot of times we say a man or an individual can't make us feel that way. But when you're already dealing with some forms of self-doubts or fears, it's not that difficult for someone else to come along and just add to what you're already feeling. So when you understand that the use of intimidation is a form of abuse, the verbal is a form. When you begin to recognize what the form of abuse looks like culturally, what it looks like just in day to day, as in that what we call that courting stage, it helps you to prepare how to walk away from that, because that doesn't change. The man or the woman does not change and say, well, I'm not going to abuse you. I'm not going to verbally put you down or emotionally abuse you. When you know what the signs look like, it helps to better prepare you for the relationship. And many times women, we're so busy, we're being a savior. We want to cultivate, we want to say it's going to be okay and it's going to work out. And you can't change someone when that is their behavior, that is what they do. Abusers have to come to a place where they want the change or the help themselves. Outside of that, there's not enough love to change a man. There's not enough validation that you realize you cannot change him. He has to want to get that help on his own. And that's just one component of it. You also have the same sex relationship. I mean, it's just so many different dynamics to domestic violence that the first thing is to know the warning signs. Once you know the warning signs, that better helps you when it comes to being able to walk away and understanding the behavior patterns of domestic violence.
And I truly appreciate that, those statements you've made. And I go back to where, you have many women and men who want to keep their families intact. They are very involved in the church, and it's like, you just gotta ride it out, and we're gonna keep our family together despite the abuse.
You know,
So, go
I
ahead.
I'm sorry. I believe when it comes to the church really has to get educated on what to do with women who have been abused. I often say, if you are a leader, you are the senior pastor, and you have no background of dealing with women who have been abused, you're not the best person to counsel them. You really
Mhm.
need someone that understands the dynamics, the emotional component. And when your abuser is a leader in your church, rather he is a elder, a deacon, what have you, there are things that need to be in place for him. And that you need to know how to remove them from their position. That's number one. You need to know how to get help for them. And there's so many ways of informing the Christian environment. You have bulletins, you have announcements. If you are being abused, it makes it less invasive that if you have some type of announcement on your bulletin boards or your projectors or however it is that you make your announcement, there has to be something in place so that women understand that being in abusive relationship and asking God to make a way, no, you get to walk away. But
Yes.
in walking away, there has to be an exit plan, because walking away from an abusive relationship is the most dangerous of when it's time to leave that relationship. And on an average, it takes a woman about 7 times before she makes up in her mind that she's
Interesting.
gone.
Yeah.
And people pass judgment and say, well, why is it taking so long? When you understand fear, you understand that man is the breadwinner. What do you do? How are you going to provide for yourself? How are you going to provide for your family? And you get the courage to leave. And then when you leave, you realize, look, this is a little tougher than what I expect. Then you go back. There's so many different dynamics.
That was going to be my question. That was going to be my question. And my question is, you know, you have both women and men who really are in that situation. And as we said, socioeconomic background sometimes is not always the case, where you may have someone who is pretty much self-sufficient, yet goes back into that abusive relationship. You know, obviously you're going to fear, if you fear, you know, that fear, I do get it, you know, when you're not sure how you're going to survive, and walking away is always the way to go.
And also, finance are the primary reason why a woman goes back to her abuser. Even if you had the finances, what that spouse or partner does to you mentally, that money means absolutely nothing, because you're paralyzed emotionally to what he says, how he validates you, or the lack of validation. In 2019, over 105,000 crimes of domestic violence were reported to just here in Florida to law enforcement agencies, and in over 66 in Florida alone, over 66,000 were arrested. So we're talking 105,000 cases of domestic violence just here in South Florida. So that speaks a lot to the who's staying and who's leaving. And then it's a whole nother component when your spouse is the chief of police or the CEO of the company. I mean, it's just that we've got to be able to get things in place for women and be able to have our legislative laws change on behalf of women and in favor of women, because women still don't tell, because the responsibility is put back on us. Like what I was saying, leaving, it takes up to about 7 times before she's finally gone, but still we get blamed for going back.
So, and you know, here we have a millennial with us, and I am wondering, you know, because it's a different breed. I find that generation is very different than us, as well as our parents. So I would like to hear from you, Tatiana. Why do you think, here you are, very beautiful, very accomplished, and probably, you know, money, you were a breadwinner. Why do you feel women who are self-sufficient like you, why do they go back?
And I'm glad you brought up that point, Gatel. So like you said, I was self-sufficient and I was the breadwinner in the relationship, but it's not just the fear of additional physical abuse that women are scared of. remember, there is emotional and verbal abuse as well. They can guilt trip us. In my situation, you know, we know that most times abusers, they suffer from traumas themselves. So like Charlene brought up, we want to be the fixer. I felt like, you know, maybe I can help this individual if I'm just that firm standing figure in their life. And then when you do decide to leave, it's turned into a guilt trip on you. Oh, you don't love me anymore, things like that. So I think we have to look past the physical abuse and also look into the emotional side of it, because there's attachments that abusers and victims have, and it's breaking that attachment.
And you know, you brought a very good point. The guilt trip. That guilt trip,
Yeah,
that's really being manipulative. So,
it is.
what do we tell our young women and young men today as it pertains to domestic violence? And I'd like to hear from each of you. So I'll start with you, Charlene.
I was thinking about when Tatiana was talking about the manipulation. There is what is called gaslighting. Gaslighting is a form of manipulation that occurs in abusive relationship. It's an insidious and sometimes covert type of emotional abuse where the bully or the abuser makes you the target, and it makes you question your judgment. It makes you question who you are as an individual, and they're calculated in that. And so
Absolutely.
when you understand that what manipulation looks like, what it feels like, by the time you realize you've been manipulated, you're so far in it that trying to get out of it, backtracking is, it's almost, it can take years. I mean, just to be able to function, to see yourself for who you used to be or who you're desiring to be. The negative words stand out. The fear is a huge component of domestic violence. That manipulation is, even when you decide you want to try to tell someone, you have to be careful that the person that you're talking to, that person is really there to support you. And we have to educate the person who's supporting the woman that's being abused or the individual that's being abused, because they're trigger words that we have, that once we hear them, it tells us that we can't trust you. You have to understand what it feels like, what it looks like, questions to not ask a victim, like, well, why don't you leave? At any point in
Yeah.
time, you pressure
I'm
us
glad you
to
brought that
leave.
up, Charlene.
Yeah, at any point in time that you pressure us that we must leave, is we don't trust you. Or you say, well, I will never be in a relationship like that. That's prejudging us. And so the regular society may not look at it that way, but it's how we hear it. And if you're here to help us, then you got to hear how it affects us, so that we can be that you can be a support system to us and know how to support us. Because if you don't know how, you're wasting your time, our time. And the best friend in the world, all it takes is to say one wrong thing, and that wrong thing sends us a different message, because we feel bad as it is. And then for me to try to trust you with what I'm feeling, and you say something insensitive, you're done.
You don't want to deal with that right now.
No,
So
not at all.
yes, you know, it's interesting, Tatiana. You started out with the three R's, and I'm sure, just like Charlene said, you've heard, "Why are you still there? Why don't you leave?" At what point did you realize, I've got to get out? At what point in that relationship you said, this is it? I am not turning back.
So I reached that point when I realized I was giving so much of myself, and I was not receiving anything back. On top of it, just remaining in that relationship was hindering me. It was hindering me progressing in life. It was hindering my relationships with my friends and family. And guess what? that person really did not have any concern or did not care. They were all about themselves. They really just did not care about my well-being. So I just got fed up with pouring into somebody who was not only abusing me, but not pouring back into myself. When I put myself first, that's when I, decided that enough was enough.
Self-love.
Yes,
Self-love is
self-love.
key. Self-love. I love it.
Self-love doesn't come easy, by the time, and you have your trigger moments. We say things like, I learned to love myself. In some cases, that's years by the time you realize you are important versus the person that says, well, just get over it, move on, you can make it. That's not easy. And I believe that is women like Tatiana and myself, we have to put a face to this and tell the truth about the emotions. I still have trigger moments. It's just that I recognize them now. I have fears that can just come out of nowhere, and I have to take a step back and look at, okay, what did I do? Who was I talking to? Words can trigger you, fragrances can trigger you. And if we don't talk about what triggers look like, when woman has that experience, she may feel like, well, I'm just having a bad day. No, you're having a trigger moment. And over 80% of domestic violence issues, it involves children as well. And so your experiences, and what are you doing about the children? We're just repeating a cycle over and over. And at some point, someone has to be able to hear our hearts, to hear, I want out, but I don't know how to get out. I want to do what's right, but I don't know how to do
right.
And so sometimes you need someone to walk you step by step by step, literally hold your hand in it. Whereas Tatiana said that she had a support system. I didn't have a support system because I did not tell. And even though I was not telling, people was aware.
People were aware, but they were afraid to bring it up.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And Charlene, you said people were aware. Also, I feel like you did not approach those people because maybe those people may have, like you said a word that triggered you or prejudged you. So even though they knew something was going on, you didn't feel comfortable enough to open up to them and say, hey, look, I really need your help here. You kind of just kept it to yourself, thinking that, you'll get past it and things change. But that's why there's community resources and, different organizations that are there for women in distress. So for people like yourself who did not have that support system, there are people out there. You just have to do your research and reach out.
Well, I tell you, I love it because this is what empowered both of you. Charlene, look what came out of all of this wonderful organization. And you, Tatiana, I understand that's also a passion of yours in Dallas.
But let me say this is that, yes, resources are out there, but I deal with a different clientele of women. And what I mean by that, when you have women that are coming out of 7-figure income brackets, the shelters that we see, they're not going there. So that's not an option for them.
You're absolutely right.
It's not a matter of it being pride. It's not an option. You know what I'm saying? And so we have to be able to have sheltering for women in different income brackets. I went to a shelter for a weekend. And when that weekend, I was like, oh, I'm not doing this. I'm not putting my children through these type of torment, because that's what it was for me. It was torment. So what I did was I went back to my abuser, but it took me years, like 5 years. I always had a plan. Let me take that back. I didn't always have a plan. I created.
It took you 5 years to plan step by step how you would successfully exit.
And the thing is, but I didn't know that it was going to be a success. I'm just saying, I don't want to give people false hope that you just wake up one day and you plan and you leave. It did not work that way for me. That's not to say that everyone will be that way, but see, I make people uncomfortable either way. When I wasn't talking about it and I was in the abuse, I was the topic of conversation. Now that I've chose to take what was traumatic for me and make it a platform, I make people uncomfortable because I talk about it. And here is what I've learned. Some people are living a public success, but privately they're failing miserably.
Mm.
And so you have to be able to, I often say they're wearing their Manolo Blahniks, their Chanel, you know, their Marc Jacobs, but behind closed doors, it is a completely different environment. And then some of those people are your boss, your supervisors, your CEOs, your, you know, your project managers, and they're rude to you. They're not fair to you, and you don't know why. No matter how great you are of an employee, they're just outright rude. And what I say to people is that we see the actions of what's going on, but do you know the why? We have to take time and learn the why. And when you understand the why, it helps you better understand individuals, because some of the things that we experience didn't have anything to do with us. It has to do with the other person who is projecting their hurt, their disappointment, their lack of failure. Because you have the stability to be able to make money, emotionally, you are a wreck.
Mm-hmm. So I agree with you. I do agree with you, and those are great points. And my last question is, very often they say that it is a revolving door. Quite often, children who see abuse as home, they either tolerate it as if this is the norm, or they become the abuser. So let me start with you, Tatiana. How what does how does that play in your journey? Or it could be something totally different.
Yes, Cattell. So, coming from an abusive home, you can kind of see the signs early off. You know, when I first got into that relationship that I was in, I saw the signs in a way that he was controlling. He was very, how do I say, attached. You know, he didn't want to spend too much time away from me. Just, you know, the way that he spoke was with his mother, or the way that he spoke with his siblings. Sometimes you can just kind of see that they came from a more aggressive home, or you know, sometimes people are not always raised the way that you are. So I feel like once you meet somebody's family or meet their loved ones, and you see how they interact with their loved ones, you can kind of paint a picture of what type of home and what type of education or mannerisms that they were taught or that they picked up as well.
Excellent point. Charlene, would you agree, or would you like to add to that last question?
You know, because I deal with women and families from so many different income brackets, it all depends on, it's a case by case situation. Because all the education in the world means nothing if you're being abused or you are the abuser. And so what I have learned is that we have to deal with people on a one-on-one base and be able to empower them based on where they're at and how to function 100%. But before they can ever get to 100%, you've got to show them where they're at in the smaller things. Because as I stated, you may have the education, but emotionally you're not there. I've seen people pout for no reasons, or they're manipulative. They set you up for failure, or they falsify information on you. Now they're extremely successful, have education beyond measure, but that emotional component that they have, they set you up for failure before you can think about. And then because they're such manipulators, people surrounding them will believe them. It's almost as if they have to be caught in the lie before that you can verify, no, they're lying or they're not telling the truth. Manipulators, I tell you, it's amazing. So
con artists, I call them. Con artists.
So it's an area of life that there's so many different components when it comes to domestic violence, education. I remember when I lived in Washington State, that there was a police chief, and this is public record, so it's not like, you know, I'm exposing someone's business. He was the chief of police, and I used to say to people, he's going to kill his wife. But because of him being the chief of police, And his staff, he bullied his staff, that the wife was keeping record, and finally she had left her husband, came back to him. He coerced her into having a conversation with him in public with the children in the back seat, and she felt safe. But you know what he did? He blew her head off. He then murdered himself in the presence of the children, and the children survived. So imagine what those kids have had to live with.
Wow, wow.
So we have to do better with our laws. We have to hold people accountable, no matter what your position may be. It's such a sad situation that we've got to stop blaming the woman. We have to stop blaming the woman, and we've got to be more intentional about what we do with our support. And it's not always about our personal experience, personally, how we survived, because I had many areas of abuse. It wasn't just emotional, it was emotional, physical. I had 10 years.
Sometimes sexual abuse as well.
Yes, and I had 10 years of memory lapse, and I look nothing like my story. But the only time I'm really talking about my personal story is if I'm in a workshop where I'm talking to women who want change, who want to know what does survival look like. Otherwise, I would just be talking and people are just a little bit nosy. And that's not what I need.
Well, I have to tell you, both of you, you have been amazing. And I know watching this program tonight, there will be someone who says, if these survivors can do it, I can do it too. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for joining us on this very important conversation, and to both of you, much success as you continue to empower others who are abused. Thanks again, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gatel.
We'll be right back with Dorothy's Coaching Corner.
Silent victims are the voiceless of those surrounding us in our society.
I will speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves.
Those who are abused,
poor, homeless, and vulnerable.
Those who have been let down by the system.
I am a part of the solution.
I am 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 a part of the solution.
Welcome to Dorothy's Coaching Corner. Today's topic is going to be, how can I help and support in relation to understanding domestic abuse? Domestic violence and abuse can be a very sensitive and private situation for many people. Wanting to help and save someone from this experience can be a passionate reaction, but approaching it with strategy and care is the most important in preventing dangerous situations. Learning and knowing how to handle the situation is the key. Abuse, as we all know, can come in many different ways to anyone involved. Knowing that the key factor is control more so than anger, it can happen to anyone. Making different resources available to that person allows them to know it's there and where they can go for help and find it. So here's some different resources and tips on helping anyone you may know facing this problem in finding that safe place and helping to transition out of this situation and problem. The first one I want to tell you about is the National Domestic Hotline. With trained advocates and confidential conversations, the victim can rest assured their discussion will be safe and also have a safe place to talk about it. That number, if needed, is 800-799-7233. Once again, 800-799-7233. Another local organization that helps women is Women in Distress. This is also an organization that will help anyone involved in domestic violence. Their number is 954-761-1133. Once again, it's 954-761-1133. A second area that can be very helpful is mental health counselors and therapists. Connecting with a mental certified and licensed therapist is a way to help mentally in dealing with abuse, which can affect the person tremendously. Having structured and trained conversations, the counselor or therapist will be able to know the dangers that person may be faced with. BetterUp is an organization with trained therapists experienced in domestic abuse and many other mental health services such as depression, anger, and relationship problems. This help can be done through online chat, video, or a phone call. The therapist will provide a confidential number to call if needed. And lastly, housing and shelter. Having a safe place for victims is, in many cases, a pathway of freedom from the abuser for them and their children in some cases. Transitional housing programs such as Hope South Florida, which his number is 954-563-4357. Once again, 954-563-4357. Or even Lotus House Women's Shelter, which is located in Miami, which number is 305-438-0556. 305-438-0556. And also, if you're located in Palm Beach, Reach Shelter Programs is also an assistance for domestic violence victims. Their phone number is 561-514-0564. Once again, 561-514-0564. These are safe places to help and assist anyone in any domestic violence situation. So with these very important resources, help is available and ready to assist in preparing to transition out of that situation.
Thank you so much, Dorothy, for your wonderful tips. But to conclude, domestic violence is a pattern of controlling behavior that one person uses to maintain power and control over their intimate partner, their child, their parent, and loved ones. Emotional abuse, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, harassment, and stalking all fall under the umbrella of domestic violence. So for a long time, we thought only women were being abused. However, we now recognize that spouses, parents, and children can be victims. So with that, I once again want to thank you for joining us this evening and wish you a wonderful Saturday night. And until next time, enjoy.